Well, Carl, thanks so much for speaking to us today. What are you expecting this weekend when Caleb Plant takes on Canelo in Las Vegas?
I'm expecting a good fight. I think that Caleb Plant probably to kind of, I suppose, I hate using the word casual boxing fans, but the casual boxing fans, he's probably not the biggest name in the world and most recognizable name. And people who aren't really, another word I don't like to use, diehard boxing fans may not know who he is, and I feel like for that reason they just expect it to be an easy night for Canelo. I just don't see it that way. I think that Canelo is an unbelievable fighter, but I also believe that Caleb Plant is a very good fighter. And if you'd asked me before the Callum Smith fight, who's the fighters that give Canelo trouble at super middleweight, I would have said Callum Smith. I'd have said Caleb Plant and Benavidez as well. Obviously, he dealt with Callum Smith pretty easily, but Caleb Plant, I think, gives him a fight. Don't think he'll win, but I think it's going to be an interesting fight.
What did you make of the clash between the pair in the press conference? Things got quite heated a month or so ago.
Yeah, it did. It was strange, wasn't it? Because it was, I think, three kind of shots thrown. I say shots because they weren't punches; they're all slaps, weren't they? So it was a bit strange, but obviously Canelo pushed him. Plant came back to try and slap him and missed. But what stood out for me most was that the fact that Canelo, in tight chinos and a tight t-shirt, is just always in fight mode, and he was able to evade the slap and land two of his own. So yeah, and obviously Plant got a cut under his eye, which it's got to have affected training and preparation a bit. That was probably 5 weeks ago, something like that. And it's got to have affected sparring a little bit at least. Didn't look like the worst cut in the world, but definitely would have had to maybe restrict the sparring a little bit for a week at least.
The big question we're asking on the show this week is, can anybody beat Canelo? What are your thoughts on that, Carl?
I think that he can be beaten, but it's very hard for me to see who beats him. I think, like I said earlier on, that I thought that Callum Smith would have given real issues and trouble, and he literally walked through Callum Smith, one of his best wins in my opinion, just in how he dealt with a very, very good fighter. I think Plant gives him trouble. I don't think he beats him. I think Benavidez potentially would give him trouble if that fight ever happens. I don't think he beats him. I think you have to move up the light heavyweight to kind of find someone who might beat him. And I think that Beterbiev is an opponent that's been mentioned, and it just sounds, it's insane that he's even being thought about as a potential opponent. But I think you have to go into that division before you really give people a chance of beating him.
Do you see any weaknesses in his game at all at the moment, Canelo?
No. I think that he's the most well-rounded fighter of a generation, really. He's as good defensively as he is going forward. It's kind of there was kind of questions maybe a few years ago about his engine, and there was times where he would have kind of rounds off, but he seems to have sorted that out. His chin is one of the best in the game at the minute. I can't pick a flaw. I really can't. I think he's the most well-rounded fighter that we have at the minute.
When you look at what he's achieved in his career, turned pro at 15, been a world champion at 4 different weight divisions, only lost one fight to Floyd Mayweather Jr. back in 2013. Where does he rank for you when it comes to the greats of this sport?
Well, his career's not finished yet, so the fact that we're talking about him potentially as being talked about and in that sort of bracket of fighter shows you how good he is, and he's still a little bit more to do. He's still he's talked about being in the sport for a number of years to come still. If he keeps going the way he's going and he keeps getting the big wins, then you could be talking about him as being one of the best ever. Certainly a conversation to be had, but he's up there. He's I hate kind of comparing different generations and different fighters because it was all very different. But in terms of what he's doing at the minute is unbelievable. He's fighting more regularly as well than most fighters. He's maybe having 3 or 4 fights at the minute where most champions are having 2, sometimes 1. He's just special fighter.
And what do you see the future being for him if he gets past Caleb Plant this weekend? He's spoken about potentially going back up to light heavyweight. In the past, he spoke about wanting to be a world champion at cruiserweight. What do you think is realistic for him?
I think he could go up and win a title at light heavyweight. But again, he's already done it against Kovalev, and people will say Kovalev over the hill and stuff, but Beterbiev is this serious opponent if he goes up there. There's a few opponents at light heavyweight. Potentially, you could see him at cruiser. It was interesting. I was doing a thing recently with and Tris Dixon was involved in it, and he was talking about him going up and fighting potentially Breedis at cruiserweight. And yeah, just it's mind blowing, really. You kind of, people talk about them fights. He's a small super middleweight. Talking about him going up to fight cruiserweights like Breedis, and thinking, yeah, he could probably win that fight. He might be a favorite actually going into that fight. So yeah, he's a phenomenal fighter. Really is. It's just a generational great.
And away from this fight this weekend, there is one coming up towards the end of December. Tommy Fury against Jake Paul. It has been confirmed now. What are your thoughts on that fight? Who are you backing?
I don't really know. So to be honest, I don't know much about them. I've seen Jake Paul, little highlights of him. I've seen a little bit of Tommy Fury. I've actually I was working for BT and one of his fights as a pundit. So I think that if you put a gun to my head, I would say I fancy Jake Paul in that fight, if I'm being honest. And I think that, although he's very, very new to boxing, he's all right. He can box a bit. Yet to fight a proper boxer. But I think he's being very careful in the opponents that he does pick. And I think that Tommy Fury, a novice professional, let's call a spade. That's what he is, a very novice professional with a lot to learn. I think he's getting them at the right time, and I would probably edge Paul in that fight, which is, I don't like to say it because I don't know how good that looks on boxing if he beats an actual boxer, yeah, so I would edge him in the fight though.
When it comes to the heavyweight scene, it does look like Dillian Whyte is going to be the next opponent for Tyson Fury. And in the past, Tyson said that the only person that can beat Tyson is himself. Do you think he'd be able to get himself up for that fight against Dillian Whyte?
Yeah, it would be a massive fight. Obviously, he's reached the heights that he's reached, but it's not as if it's a Wallen fight, something like that. It's a big fight, especially in the UK. I think there will be a lot of media hype around it. I don't think there will be any issue in Tyson Fury getting himself up for a fight with Dillian Whyte. I think he would beat Dillian Whyte. I think he'd beat him comfortably enough, if I'm being honest. And then I would say, a couple more fights. Usyk, if he's still the champion. AJ maybe still. And then pack it in and go and retire as one of the greatest British fighters of all time.
And just finally, I wanted to ask you about AJ. He's been out in America. He's been training with a number of different trainers. What do you make of his training situation? He said he'd like to stay with Rob McCracken, but bring somebody else in. What do you think he needs to do to give himself a chance in this rematch?
Well, I think his loyalty is, you can admire his loyalty to Rob McCracken, but who's the coach then? What's the point in having Rob if you're bringing someone else in, and there may be conflicts there and people with different ideas. I think if you have a boxing coach, you should have one boxing coach. I really do. But I think that he's right in looking elsewhere. I don't think it's a bad idea in going to America. Obviously, he's a huge name, and he's a huge name globally, really. But I think he could probably walk down the street in the States You try to get AJ to walk down any street in the UK, and it's, you know, there's crowds of people following him. So I think go to America, team up with a coach, one coach, and just try and get a bit of dog back. You know what I mean? It was like he's a big unit of a man, he's a powerhouse, and he needs to kind of impose his strength and his athleticism on people. You know, he's not a fancy Dan boxer, which he was trying recently. He just needs to be the brute that he is, and I think going with a good coach in America, I think will definitely benefit him.